welcome all. Thank you for joining us. We've got a great presentation by Wesley here tonight, and then Nate is going to hop in towards the end and get some other things said in there. If you guys have any questions, we ask that you hold them to the end, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end of the session. All right. Wesley, I'm going to make you the host right now.
All right, sounds good.
You will have control.
Okay, let's see. All right, I'm going to try sharing my screen here. Let's see if this works. Okay, can everybody see the National Airspace System stuff on my screen here?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So great to see everybody tonight coming out for the Zoom session. It's nice to see some familiar faces as well. So before I get started, I just want to say thanks to Steve, Gabrielle, Naomi, James, and Ken for all of their help and support with getting these Zoom sessions together. And of course, thanks to Ken Greenberg for getting the videos together as well. And thanks to Nate, who's coming online tonight to also present. So I appreciate you being here, man. And I'm looking forward to doing more of these Zoom sessions with you later. All right, so we'll get started here. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Wesley Chin. I'm a CFI at the Princeton Flying School, and I've been teaching here since October of 2020. I actually have been training at the Princeton Flying School for a while, so I did my private, instrument, commercial, CFI, and AGI all at this school, and it's been a pretty fun experience transitioning from a student to an instructor there. When I'm not teaching flying, I'm currently pursuing my bachelor's degree in finance at the Rutgers Business School, and I also teach saxophone and piano on the side. All right, so let's get started here. So, when we look up in the sky, right, we don't see any roads. There's no stop signs, no speed limit signs or traffic lights or any of that. However, when we're flying, it's not exactly just a free-for-all. We do have established airspace boundaries and different rules for each type of airspace that we want to follow. So the FAA has been able to define different airspaces to be able to manage all of the air traffic that's traversing our skies every day. So if we want to be safe and efficient pilots, we really must know the rules and requirements regarding each type of airspace. So the objective for today is going to come right from the Private Pilot Airman Certification Standards here. So everyone who's preparing for your check ride, here we go. So National Airspace System. So we are trying to get you to exhibit satisfactory knowledge, risk management, and skills associated with the NAS operating under VFR as a private pilot. So we'll first start off by talking about the different airspace classes, operating rules, certification, and equipment requirements for each one. And then we'll also briefly discuss the VFR weather minimums for each class. We'll also go on to talk about special use airspace and then finally other airspace areas. So let's get started here. So just to make sure we're clear with what the NAS is, right, just like we talked about, to handle all the airplanes that are traversing our skies, the FAA has developed the National Airspace System. And basically this system divides the atmosphere up into different airspaces based on a couple of different factors, such as the level of traffic in each area, the nature or type of operations going on, the level of safety required, and also of national and public interest. So for example, busier airports like JFK and Newark, the airspace surrounding those airports are classified differently than the airspace around Princeton. So we've got 4 different types of airspace that we want to understand. And the first one's going to be controlled airspace. Pretty simply, this is where you're going to have air traffic control services provided to both IFR and VFR flights. And the level of service is going to be a little bit different for each airspace classification. So within this, we've got 5 different airspace classes to discuss. And that's going to be class A, B, C, D, and E. So we've got 5 in there. Your second type of airspace is uncontrolled airspace. So again, you don't have ATC service here. This is anything not designated as just those 5 we talked about. So uncontrolled airspace, we've got Class G, Class Gulf airspace. Third type of airspace we'll talk about is special use airspace. So in here, there's just certain activities that have to be confined within those limits, or if we're flying through there, there may be certain limitations imposed on us since we're not part of those activities. So some examples of special use that we'll talk about include your alert areas, restricted areas, stuff like that. And then finally, we'll talk about other airspace. So this is just stuff not considered standard or special use. Some examples that I'm sure we're all familiar with, TFRs, right, temporary flight restrictions. So just to make sure we're clear with what exactly airspace is, right? We just want to understand each unique sector of airspace is going to have both lateral and vertical boundaries. So lateral boundaries, like your distances, can be nice and simple, like a circle or anything, but they can be pretty complex based on the area. And when we talk about the vertical boundaries, we're just trying to describe the upper and lower altitude limits. So basically the ceiling and the floor. So when I'm talking about all of these different classes, I'm going to use this diagram here to help us out. And we're going to start with class alpha, go all the way to class golf, A through G. And generally, that's going to be from most restrictive to least restrictive here. So let's start off with class A airspace. So class A is going to extend from 18,000 feet MSL up to and including flight level 600. So a good way to remember this, class A, class alpha, is above the rest over there. So if you're pursuing your private license or private certificate, what you have to understand is all operations in class A are going to be conducted under IFR, instrument flight rules, right? So if you only plan on, flying VFR, you're only a private pilot, you're never going to end up in class A airspace. You're not going to see this on a sectional chart either, something to note there. So if we take a look at this diagram, here's class A on top. 18,000 MSL to 60,000 MSL, which is flight level 600, and we see that it says IFR only. The next, we'll talk about class B, class Bravo airspace. So this is generally the airspace from surface to 10,000 feet MSL, and it's going to be surrounding the nation's busiest airports. So B for busy. So this is where you got a lot of that IFR traffic, all the airliners. So some examples of class B airspace around us, around JFK, Newark, LaGuardia, Philly. So there's New York class Bravo and Philly class Bravo. That's around us here. So within this airspace, class B, you're going to get radar approach control services, and each primary class Bravo airport will have an operational control tower. And generally, the class Bravo airspace will kind of resemble an upside down wedding cake. So if we kind of take a look at this diagram over here, here's class B airspace on the bottom left. And you see we kind of have this one core ring from surface 10,000. You have a shelf ring that starts a little higher, goes out a little bit more, and then one final shelf ring. So again, this is to accommodate aircraft that are departing and coming in. So again, it kind of resembles that upside down wedding cake. I know I said generally it's surface 10,000 and kind of has a specific shape, but it's not always going to follow that, as we'll take a look at. So I'm going to go hop over to Sky Vector over here. And here's your New York sectional. If we kind of zoom out a little bit, this blue solid line is your New York class Bravo airspace, and you've got different inner rings here. So you can tell this is definitely not a simple, circle shape. It's kind of complex, surrounding 3 different airports here. And this actually doesn't go all the way up to 10,000 MSL. We can see this outer ring, for example. The ceiling is 7,000 feet MSL for the class Bravo in New York there. So again, it's going to be a little bit different. So just check your chart each time. So to operate within Class B, Class Bravo, you're going to need at least a private pilot certificate or a student pilot certificate with an endorsement from an instructor there. And you're also going to need what we call an air traffic control clearance. So you definitely want to be talking to the air traffic control to enter Class Bravo. So first of all, that's establishing what we call two-way radio communications. So for example, if you call them and you can say, New York approach, Skyhawk 298 Mike Charlie, and if they respond back, Skyhawk 298 Mike Charlie, New York approach, right there counts as two-way radio communications when he repeats your call sign back. We also have to get a clearance though. So air traffic control has to explicitly say cleared into the class of Bravo airspace. It's kind of somewhat related. I don't know, maybe some of you have seen this before. This guy was flying around in the Las Vegas class Bravo and he actually didn't get a clearance. So I'm just going to play a little bit of this. Let me see if I can get my, audio to share. All right.
Have a 285 cleared for the visual approach, runway 26 left.
Clear to visual, 26 left, Pablo 285.
And 1 November Romeo, I need you outside of the Bravo.
Negative.
Negative what?
I'm inside.
You were not given a clearance through the Bravo. 1 November Romeo, exit the Bravo immediately.
I've been talking to you the whole time. That's the whole point of talking to you.
You have to have a Bravo clearance. You have to request a Bravo clearance.
The Bravo clearance about 50 miles ago.
Nobody clears you through the Bravo but me.
Then clear me through.
No.
Yes.
All right, I'll stop it right there. But basically in that situation, this pilot, November 731 November Romeo, whatever it was, You thought just by, getting that two-way radio communications, you're all good inside the Bravo, but we have to remember you need an air traffic control clearance. So you actually have to get cleared through the Bravo. So that's something to remember there. You also have to have something called an altitude reporting transponder. And there's something associated with this Class B airspace called the Mode C veil. So anytime you're within 30 nautical miles of a primary Class Bravo airport from surface 10,000, you've got to be equipped with that Mode C altitude reporting transponder, even if you're not actually in the Class B. So if we go back to, let's see, Sky Vector over here. I'm going to show you, here's the Class Bravo airspace again in that blue solid line. But surrounding that, if I kind of zoom out even more, there's this solid magenta line, if you guys can see this there. So that is the Mode C veil for New York's Class B. If we kind of zoom in, it says 30 nautical mile Mode C as a reminder there. And so, for example, even though let's say we're at Old Bridge, for example, we're not actually inside the Class B, but we are inside the Mode C veil. So you would have to have Mode C transponders. Same thing at Princeton. So take a look, we're right inside the Mode C veil, 30 nautical miles. So we would have to have that Mode C transponder to operate there. Got the same speed limits, right? So anytime you're below 10,000 feet in MSL, we cannot exceed 250 knots. And if you're below Class Bravo airspace, you cannot exceed 200. So going back to the sectional, let's say you're flying along the shore over here at 2,000 feet. We know that the Bravo starts at 3,000. So you're technically, you're not in the Bravo, but you actually cannot exceed 200 knots in that location. All right, so let's see. Let me just change my sound setting again. Okay, there we go. So next slide, we're going to talk about Class Charlie, Class C airspace. So less restrictive now. So generally, this is going to extend from surface to 4,000 feet AGL, and it's going to cover somewhat busy airports. So it's not as busy as JFK, but a little busier than something like Trenton. So you have a solid mix of airline and GA traffic. So some examples nearby: Atlantic City and Allentown. Those are both Class Charlie airspace. So the services are going to be pretty similar to Class B. So you're still going to get radar approach control within 20 nautical miles, which is what we call the outer area for Class Charlie. And you're still going to have an operational control tower at the primary airport. And again, generally, you're going to have that, small core ring, and then you have a shelf ring on top. I'm not really going to too worry about these altitudes here, as it's kind of general and will change for each airport. But here it is on that diagram again. So here's Class C. You can kind of tell it's like we just took off that top layer of Class Bravo, and now we just have one core ring with the 5 nautical mile radius from surface to 4,000 AGL, and we just have one shelf ring on top from 1,200 AGL to 4,000 AGL. The reason why we see 1,400 or 4,200 here in this is, remember, that's going to be an MSL, so which means this airport, wherever this is, has an elevation of 200 feet. So unlike Class Bravo, you're not going to need to have any specific certification. So if you're a student pilot, you can operate in Class Charlie without any problem. And something different as well, we don't need a clearance to operate in Class Charlie. So the only airspace class with the clearance that we need is Class Bravo. Everything else, don't have to worry about that. Here we have to have just the two-way radio communication. So as long as that tower approach repeats your call sign back, you're only good to enter there. If they don't, for example, let's say you call up Allentown approach, you say Allentown approach, Skyhawk 172 Foxtrot Whiskey, and they respond back, aircraft calling, please stand by. That's not going to count as two-way radio communication, and you can't enter there. Similarly, you're going to need that Mode C or altitude reporting transponder, and still can't exceed 250 knots anytime you're below 10,000 feet MSL there. However, if you're below 2,500 feet AGL and within 4 nautical miles of a primary Class Charlie airport, you can't exceed 200 knots. So it's basically you're in that kind of inner core ring, getting nice and low close to the airport. Don't go fast. All right, so I'll show you guys in the sectional also Class Charlie. So if we kind of go to Allentown, here we go, Allentown Class Charlie airspace, and this is going to have a solid magenta line. So it still has that core ring from surface to 4,000 AGL, and here's that shelf ring surrounding it. However, this shelf ring and kind of starts at different altitudes in different spots. So here the shelf ring starts at 2,200 MSL. Here it starts at 1,900, and here's 2,800. So again, just check your chart for more information. All right, so we'll move to Class D, Class Delta airspace, so even less restrictive now. So generally, this will extend from surface to 2,500 feet AGL. Normally going to have between a 4 to 5 nautical mile radius, but again, this is going to change based on the operational needs or any instrument approaches of that area. So all this stuff is general, it's going to change. Lots of different Class D airspaces around us. So we have some surrounding Trenton, Let's see here, Lakehurst, McGuire, Philly Northeast, Lancaster, Reading, all of that is going to be Class Delta airspace. So these services with Class Delta are going to be a little bit different here. So there's not going to be that mandatory approach and departure control anymore because they're not as busy as Class Bravo or Charlie airports. Your primary Class D airport will still have an operational control tower, but the difference is it's actually going to be part-time. So the airspace is only going to be Class Delta when the tower is in operation. So if we take a look at our sectional chart, and we're going to go find some Class D over here. So here's Trenton. Class D is going to be denoted by this dashed blue line. So we see it's not a perfect circle, right? There's some kind of extension here, likely for instrument approaches going into those runways over here. And this is from surface 2,700 feet MSL, which makes sense since the elevation at Trenton is 213 there to kind of round that. So how exactly do we know what airspace this reverts to, as we said, right? So when tower is closed, it changes to something else, not Class Delta anymore. So to figure it out, we have to check your chart supplement. So I'm going to open up the chart supplement here for Trenton. And let's see. So we verify, all right, that's Trenton. And we can scroll down. And right here, there's a section for airspace. So it says Class D service from 1100 to 0300 Zulu. We observe daylight savings. At all other times, it's Class Echo or Class E. So there's your answer right there for figuring out what airspace that reverts to. So we can take a look at this diagram again, right? So here's Class Delta airspace. And again, we just kind of chopped off that shelf ring for Class C. So now it's just basically one core ring with about a 4 to 5 nautical mile radius, surface to 2,500 AGL. So pretty similar to Class Charlie here. You're not going to need any specific certification to operate here, and you just have to establish two-way radio communications. So you don't need that clearance. However, you don't need to also have that mode C or altitude reporting transponder. So if you don't have one, you can still operate within Class Delta. Again, it's the least restrictive. So same speed limits again, can't exceed 250 knots below 10,000 feet MSL. And whenever you're below 2,500 feet AGL and within 4 nautical miles of a primary Class D airport, you can't exceed 200 knots. So pretty much that's when you're in the Delta. All right, so we're not going to talk about Class Echo or Class E. And as we remember, this is still a controlled airspace. And in general, it's kind of the largest part of the national airspace system. And you're going to spend the majority of your flying time in this airspace. It's a little bit difficult to understand sometimes because it does start at different altitudes all over the map. But we're going to try to explain it in an easier way here. So I'll just show you this diagram. As you can tell, here's Echo. It's pretty much everything else that's not what we discussed so far. So there's this acronym we can use, set food, to kind of talk about all the segments of Class Echo airspace. This is not something I made up. I found this, I think it was an Embry Riddle video on YouTube or something that explained it pretty well. So I'm going to steal that. It works. So, all right, we're going to start with the first S in set food, which is going to be Class E surface areas. So you're going to find this on a sectional whenever you have a dashed magenta line surrounding an airport. So here's an example. Another good example nearby is Millville down in South Jersey as Class E surface area. So this is just going to denote that you have Class Echo airspace beginning from the surface up to, but not including 18,000 feet MSL. And the whole reason for this is really just to protect any precision instrument procedures. The second segment E is going to be Class E extensions. So same kind of deal. It's just you're extending some specific airspace. Maybe you're extending Class B, C, or D and adding on some Class E. So we take a look at our sectional. This is McGuire. Generally, you have Class D airspace surrounding it, but in some spots, like over here, over here, over here, there's some Class E extensions there. So again, that's Class Echo starting from the surface. And the whole point of this is just to provide controlled airspace to contain any instrument approaches without imposing a communications requirement upon any VFR pilots there. So your third segment of Class Echo is going to be Class E transition areas. This is probably the most common one you're going to come across. And the whole point of this, again, is to allow any IFR traffic to remain in controlled airspace while transitioning between the en route environment to any airport environment. So again, we're just trying to protect aircraft that are on departure or an instrument approach. So we're going to take a look at the sectional again to determine where we can find all this Class Echo transition areas. So if you take a look at the sectional, there's just kind of weird magenta lines or something. I don't know what the term is. I just call them like fuzzy little lines or whatever. So we take a look. There's a hard side and kind of a fuzzy side or a softer side. Anytime you're on the softer fuzzy side of the magenta, Class Echo begins at right here, 700 feet AGL. when you're on the opposite side, when you're on the harder side, for example, this little kind of section here, whatever this is, Class Echo begins at 1,200 feet AGL. So for Princeton, right, if we take a look, here's your Princeton Airport, we are on the softer side of this magenta shaded line, right? So that means Class Echo begins at 700 feet AGL. And this little section, I don't know, whoever, there's no airport here, but this little kind of carve out, Class Echo begins at 1,200 AGL. All right, so your fourth segment is going to be F, your federal airways. So basically your highways of the sky, right? Each airway is going to be 8 nautical miles wide. So you have a center line, 4 nautical miles on each side, and they're going to start at 1,200 feet AGL up to, but not including 18,000 feet MSL. So if we look at a sectional, here's an example of Victor 16. That's one of your federal airways nearby. So there's 3 other segments of Class Echo, the OOD of the acronym. No one really cares about these. They kind of exist, but we don't really see these too often. So I'll kind of go over them briefly. So one of these is your offshore airspace area. And it's the same deal. We're just trying to provide airspace to allow IFR aircraft to get ATC services. And just by the name, this is offshore. So in this example here, you're going to find these kind of blue zipper looking lines. And this denotes an offshore airspace area where Class Echo begins at 1,300 MSL up to, but not including 18,000 feet MSL. Your second to last segment, other. So generally Class E is actually going to begin at 14,000 feet MSL up to, but not including that 18,000. You're going to find these when you have those blue shaded lines. I looked throughout the entire New York sectional. I couldn't find any one of those, so it's not really something to worry about. I couldn't really find one anywhere, but that's one segment of other. And we also can understand that whenever you're above Class Alpha or Class A, that's actually Class E again. So like we talked about earlier, Class A goes up to flight level 600. And when you go above that, Class Echo actually restarts. So if for some reason you're flying along at flight level 700, you're actually in Class Echo airspace. And our last segment we'll talk about here, en route domestic areas. So maybe, a while ago out in the West, there's not enough federal airways or whatever out there. So they would establish these en route domestic areas of Class E just to allow air traffic control to provide services to IFR en route traffic. It's the same kind of deal. You're going to have those blue zippers to denote lateral limits with altitudes. I couldn't even find an example, so I'm not really sure if there's any out there anymore, but it's still in the book. All right, so that's all the segments for Class E. I know it's kind of tough to remember those, but if you kind of use that acronym SET food and just kind of remember that, that's pretty helpful there. So similar stuff here, you're not going to need any specific certification to operate in Class Echo, and there's no specific equipment requirements or operational procedures. So we're not really worried about that two-way radios or transponder stuff anymore. You still can't exceed 250 knots if you're below 10,000 feet MSL, but when you're above that, you can do whatever you want. But however, we do want to remember this is still controlled airspace, but there's actually no communication requirements if you're flying VFR. But of course, you can request traffic advisory from air traffic control on a workload permitting basis. All right, so our last class of airspace, we're going to talk about Class Golf, Class G airspace, which is your uncontrolled airspace. So anything not designated as A, B, C, D, or E, what we talked about before, right? And generally, Class G is going to extend from surface to the base of your overlying airspace, which is usually Class Echo. So if we take a look at our sectional again, we remember since Princeton is on the soft side of this magenta border, Class Echo begins at 700 feet AGL, which means everything below that from surface to including 699 AGL, that's all going to be Class G airspace. Since it's uncontrolled, air traffic control is not going to have any authority or responsibility controlling air traffic, right? So it's going to be all up to us now. So if we take a look at our diagram again, here's some examples of Class G. So this one right here is what we kind of have at Princeton. So Class G is surface to 700 AGL, and all above that is going to be Class Echo up to, but not including 18,000 MSL. So to operate within Class Golf or Class G, no specific certification, no specific equipment, no specific operational procedures. So this is the least restrictive. And again, same speed limits, right? Anytime you're below 10,000, can't exceed 250 knots. On the rare occasion that you ever find an airport with an operating control tower in Class G airspace, I think there's one in Florida. I don't know if anyone's been there, probably not. But what happens is the airspace is still uncontrolled, where you do have to establish tower communications prior to 4 nautical miles from the airport and up to including 2,500 feet AGL. If you want to learn more about that, that's in 91-126. So here's just a little chart to review everything we talked about with the different classes. the entry requirements, the equipment, and minimum pilot certificates, right? I'm not going to go over that, but that's there if you guys want to look back on it. And again, this chart you can find in the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, kind of similar to what I was showing earlier, to have a graphical display of all the different classes of airspace. So what I want to do now, let's just take a look at this New York sectional, and we're going to imagine we are at Morristown right over here. So there's Morristown, Mike uniform. And let's pretend we are going to do a rocket launch. We're going to shoot a rocket straight up from Morristown and go all the way up to, let's say, flight level 800. So can anybody here tell me all of the different airspaces I'm going to encounter if I do that? So again, we're going to say we're on the ground at Morristown. I'm going to shoot a rocket all the way up to 80,000 feet. What's all the different airspace I'm going to encounter with their altitude? So it's a little bit tricky. So I'm curious to see if anyone wants to try this here. So let's see. Is it possible to unmute? All right, guess no one wants to try it. How about Nate? You want to try it, man? Or can he talk? Let's see. Oh, here we go. All right, I have to ask to unmute. Okay, did that work?
He should be able to unmute himself.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, it seems like no one wants to try it. Okay. Do you want to demonstrate, Nate? See if we can figure out all of our airspaces.
Okay, can you say, you tell us the question again, Wesley?
Yeah, you got it. So let's say we are on the ground at Morristown, right over here, and we're going to shoot a rocket straight up to 80,000 feet. So we're trying to figure out all the different airspace classes we're going to encounter as we kind of go all the way up. It's like starting from surface all the way up to 80,000.
All right, I love rockets. Okay, so
yeah, all right.
So Morristown is, if you check the AFP, assuming everything is 24 hours opt, so the first airspace you're going to come upon is Class D airspace. Okay, right above it, I see the outer layer of Class Bravo right there at 3,000 feet. So, but there is that cushion right there between the 3,000 and the 2,700. That looks like a Class E airspace. So I'm going from D to E to B, over to A, and back to E again.
All right, sounds pretty good to me there. So yeah, it's kind of complex, but again, that's just using all of our knowledge to figure out all these different airspaces. So yeah, we're starting with a Delta up to 2,700. And then like Nate said, between 2,700 and 3,000, that's gonna be Class E. Then we are in this outer ring of the New York Class Bravo. So that's 3,000 to 7,000. Above that, we've got Class Echo up to, not including 18,000 MSL. Then you've got Class Alpha, which is going to be 18,000 to flight level 600. And then for that last portion, if anyone remembers, that's Class E again above Class A. So, all right, there we go. So cool. We're going to briefly talk about the VFR weather minimums now required to operate in all of these different classes of airspace. It's kind of long to talk about all this, but we'll just kind of go over this quickly. So first, Class A. There are no basic VFR weather minimums. Why? Because there's no VFR in Class A. If one remembers, right, there's only instrument flight rules or IFR here. So there's no flight visibility to maintain. There's no distance from clouds. Let's say you're flying around in New York Class B airspace. In Class B, you've got to maintain 3 statute miles of flight visibility and remain clear of clouds. If you're operating in Class Charlie or Class Delta, the VFR weather minimums are going to be 3 statute miles of flight visibility. And for distance from clouds, you've got to maintain 1,000 feet above, 500 feet below, and 2,000 feet horizontal distance from those clouds. So now let's talk about the Class Echo, Class E airspace. If you find yourself flying in Class E below 10,000 MSL, it's going to actually be those same minimums. So 3 statute miles, 1,000 above, 500 below, 2,000 horizontal. So I like to remember that as Cessna 152, 152, if that helps there. However, if you're in Class E at or above 10,000 MSL, it's going to change to 5 statute miles visibility. And you're going to need 1,000 feet above, 1,000 feet below, 1 statute mile horizontal. And the reason for this change, there's a specific reason why it occurs at 10,000 feet MSL. And the big reason is our speed limit, right? Anytime you're below that, you can't exceed 250 knots. But once you go above that, airplanes are flying really, really fast, right? So you want to make sure you've got enough distance there. Class G, Class Golf weather minimums are a little bit tougher to memorize. Not necessarily tough to understand, but there's just a lot of nuances there. But we'll just go over this here. So if you're in Class G at 1,200 feet or less above the surface, regardless of MSL altitude, In the daytime, you just need 1 statute mile visibility, clear of clouds. So like at Princeton, for example. However, at nighttime, it's going to revert back to that 3-1-5-2 rule we talked about. If you're in Class G, but you're above 1,200 feet AGL and less than 10,000 MSL in the day, you're going to need 1 statute mile and then 152. So that's again 1,000 above, 500 below, 2,000 feet horizontal. But at night, it's that same thing for all nighttime, right? 3-1-5-2. But now let's say you're in Class G, you're going to be above 1,200 feet AGL and also above 10,000 feet MSL. You're going to, again, revert to the 5 statute miles, 1,000 above, 1,000 feet below, 1 statute mile horizontal. Some people think it's easy to memorize this chart just by writing it a bunch of times. If that works for you, great. You got your weather minimums memorized. Some people don't love this. There's CFI, Rod Machado created this little triangle or chart to kind of memorize the different weather minimums. This is not mine. Found this online. So basically, if you just kind of draw this out maybe 15 or 20 times, you'll probably have the weather minimums memorized. So for example, kind of show you how to read this. In Class Echo or Golf, if you're above 10,000 feet MSL, here's your weather minimum. So 5 statute mile visibility, 1 mile horizontal distance, 1,000 feet above, 1,000 feet below. So this is kind of an alternative method of memorizing those weather minimums. So before I move on to the other types of airspace, I do want to bring up something called special VFR. So sometimes when weather conditions deteriorate from visual to instrument conditions, so when you're falling below that 3 statute mile visibility and 1,000 feet ceilings, we may find ourselves in areas which legally require IFR, right? However, somehow we may be able to accomplish visual navigation, and here we can use what's called special VFR. So this could get us into or out of an airport with low ceilings or visibility. Again, this is best used for localized weather, like maybe just low clouds hanging around Trenton or something. We do not want to use this to push your limits in bad weather, right? If you see your entire route has super low ceilings, you're pushing it marginal VFR close to IFR, this is not something you want to use, and you just want to stay on the ground. So for special VFR, to get this clearance, you have to have a minimum of 1 statute mile flight visibility and remain clear of clouds. And to use during the day, you don't have to have an instrument rating, so a private pilot can use this. However, at night, you do have to have an instrument rating and be in an instrument-equipped airplane to use special VFR. The other thing to understand about this is air traffic control is actually never going to give you a special VFR clearance, unlike the others. You actually have to request it. So that's assuming you know the area, you have to request a special VFR clearance from them. All right, so we'll now move on to special use airspace, right? So special use airspace. So as we talked about earlier, there's just something going on in these airspaces where those activities have to be confined because of their nature, whatever it is. And if we're flying through, there may be limitations imposed on us. So we're going to talk about 6 different types of special use airspace. We've got prohibited areas, restricted areas, warning areas, military operation areas, alert areas, and finally controlled firing areas. So our first one here, prohibited areas are established for security and other national welfare concerns. And just by our name, prohibited areas, flight of aircraft is prohibited. So we can see it on our sectional chart by kind of these blue lines, kind of looks like a comb or something. I'm not really sure what the term for that is, but here's prohibited area P206. Another example, P67 in Maine is for a bush compound around there. We have another one called restricted areas. So within these special use airspace, this is going to contain some kind of unusual or hazardous operations. So maybe they're practicing missile launches, air combat training, stuff like that. And we have to understand we cannot fly through an active restricted area without permission from the controlling agency. So it's not always going to be active. So if the restricted area is inactive or cold, air traffic control will allow you to operate in that airspace. So here's an example down near Eagle's Nest. There's one surrounding West Point as well. So there's also something called a warning area. It's kind of similar to a restricted area in a sense that it's the exact same activities, but now you're pretty much over the coast. So this is an airspace that extends from 3 nautical miles outward from the US coast. And again, same hazardous activities as a restricted area. However, we don't need permission to enter, but if it is active, you do want to exercise extreme caution. We also have military operation areas, MOAs, right? And the whole point of an MOA is to separate military training activity from IFR traffic. So us VFR traffic, we are allowed to fly through an MOA without any clearance, but you still, again, want to exercise extreme caution. So here's an example on your sectional right. You've got those now magenta kind of comb lines surrounding it. So here's the Bush Creek MOA, Buckeye MOA. So these are not going to have numbers. They'll actually have specified names associated with them. Here's one that's pretty important is we have one pretty close by that we should be familiar with. So alert areas. So we have alert areas to advise pilots that there's basically a high volume of pilot training or some kind of unusual aerial activity located there. As you can see, here's an alert area. It's again got that magenta kind of comb line, and instead of MOA, you see A, so that's going to be alert area. So A220 is this alert area here, and it surrounds those two Air Forces bases, right? So Lakehurst and McGuire. So with an alert area, we don't need a clearance to enter, so you're allowed to fly through there as VFR, but again, definitely exercise extreme caution. So something I've mentioned so far, I've talked about kind of all the lateral limits, how to find them on your sectional, but how do we know when it's active? How do we know who to contact to kind of request clearance to go through it? How do we know what altitudes they go up to? So does anybody know how to figure out that information by any chance? So if you want to unmute your mic, you can do that. Let's see. All right, cool. So all good. We're going to explain how to do this right now. So again, that sectional chart, just by looking at it, we can't really tell when it's active or when the, where altitude extends to or their controlling agencies. So what we can do though, let's hop over to SkyVector again and open up our New York sectional chart. So if we go to the bottom right here, special use airspace on New York sectional chart, and it's going to actually list out all the different special use airspaces. So your prohibited areas, restricted areas, alert areas, all that other stuff. So for example, let's take a look here. Alert area A220 extends from surface to 4,500, and it's only active from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. local time. Let's find another example here. Would be a good one. All right, so let me scroll a little bit more to this side here. Okay, so here's an MOA we can look at. So, okay, Cranberry MOA, which is somewhere on the New York sectional. I have no clue. But altitude, it says this is from 500 feet AGL to, but not including 6,000 AGL. So if you see you're flying in the area, but you're at 8,000, you shouldn't have to worry about those military traffic. So time of use, it's only active from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. local, and it's only Monday through Friday from November 1st to April 30th. So if you are flying around in summer, you don't have to worry about that. So your contact facility, if you need to contact someone about it, Boston Center, you can reach them on 135.25. So the bottom of your sectional chart, this legend is going to be very useful for determining any information about those special use airspaces. All right, and then there's one more, if anyone remembers, that we had, and this is going to be called a controlled firing area. And there's a reason I'm leaving this at the end after all the sectional chart. So in your controlled firing area, I don't know, they may be doing some kind of hazardous activities, but the difference is here, there's actually like a spotter aircraft or some ground lookout position that can figure out when there's an aircraft or non-participating aircraft approaching. When they see someone coming, they will stop whatever they're doing. So they suspend their activities when they see someone coming. So that's why we actually are not going to see controlled firing areas on charts. There's no reason to have it on a chart because they can tell when someone's coming. So they'll stop there. So before moving on to our last section of other airspace, I just want to bring up this little website here for special use airspace that the FAA has. So sua.faa.gov. If you kind of zoom in, this is your map of all active special use airspaces. And you can kind of click on it for more information. So it'll pop up and show what the airspace is, the start and end times, the altitudes, all that stuff. So this is another useful tool you can use to supplement your pre-flight planning when looking at airspace. All right, so we're on to our last section here, other airspace areas. So first one we'll talk about, not really too important for us, but it is in the book. So there's something called a local airport advisory. So this is an area within 10 statute miles of a non-towered airport where you're going to have a flight service station on the field. This is actually only in Alaska if you read, so nothing too important for us here. But again, you're just going to get flight service station services. You could have local airport advisories, weather readouts, stuff like that. But again, nothing too important for us since this is, again, only available in Alaska. However, this is important for us. Temporary flight restrictions, TFRs, right? Pretty self-explanatory by the name. This restricts certain aircraft from operating within a defined area on a temporary basis. So a couple reasons for establishing a TFR. This is not inclusive. So one reason, as we know, to protect the president, vice president, or some other public figure. They may establish a TFR for air shows or sporting events. So if you're flying around and there's a game at the Rutgers Stadium, they'll have a TFR around that. So definitely check for that in advance. Or if there's like a natural disaster, hazard areas, they'll establish TFR. We're down in Florida for a space flight, for example. So a couple of different ways you can check for TFRs, right? Always check your NOTAMs. So they'll issue that over there. You can call flight service station, get your briefing, check for flights, Sky Victor, all that good stuff. But there's also a TFR website, so tfr.faa.gov. So if we open this up, let me let this load. Here's your list of active TFRs. I don't want to go to that. You can click TFR map, and it will show you a display as well on the map. Let's see. Here it is. Okay, so here's the TFR map page loading up, and again, if we zoom in using all these buttons, you'll be able to have a graphical display of all the TFRs active. So another useful tool, definitely when you're doing your pre-flight planning. So with the, as we know from the Trump TFR, there's kind of a bunch of different rings. So usually Princeton fell on the outer ring, so we're able to get out of it. I think for the Biden TFR, that does not extend all the way to west. It does kind of, the outer ring at least goes into some of the Philly class Bravo. So if you end up flying closer there when he's here, definitely check your TFRs and be familiar with those procedures. So we also have something called an ADIZ, Air Defense Identification Zones. Basically, it's just the airspace boundaries when you are between domestic airspace and international airspace. So you're basically going to find this along neighboring countries and our coastlines, right? So here it is on the sectional chart, contiguous US ADIZ, and that's the kind of line there that you'll see. So within ADIZ, you're going to have to be on an IFR or defense VFR flight plan. You're going to have to report your estimated time of airspace penetration. You're going to need two-way radio communications for position reports, and you will also need a Mode C altitude reporting transponder. So something else that we can see in our sectional is the military training routes. So again, military aircraft use these routes to conduct low altitude, high speed training. So basically those fighter jets going or exceeding 250 knots below 10,000 feet MSL. So here it is on your sectional chart, these kind of thin silver or gray lines. They're going to say IR or VR followed by some numbers, and those actually have meaning. So if you have IR, that's going to be an IFR route. VR is going to be a VFR route, and the numbers also have meaning too. So if proportion of the route is going to be above 1,500 feet AGL, they're going to have three numbers after. So for example, here IR 762 or IR 714. But if the portion of the route is going to be below 1,500 AGL, you're going to have four numbers afterwards. So like IR or VR 1756 is an example there. So there's something called VFR flyways. These are just general flight paths, not like specific paths, just for VFR aircraft to transition around, under, or through complex airspace like Class B. So with this, you're actually not entering Class B, you're just trying to go around it, so you don't need a clearance or anything. And again, it's just kind of a general path, so it's not a specific course to fly. You're going to find these on the back of your terminal area chart if you do have one. We don't have a VFR flyway planning chart for New York Class Bravo, but there is one over here for Salt Lake City Class Bravo. So kind of these arrows over here, I know it's kind of hard to see, but those are just paths for VFR aircraft to remain clear or transition through or around the Class Bravo. However, what we do have, which some of you may be familiar with, is the VFR transition route. So these are published routes that actually go through the Class Bravo. So you're now inside that Class Bravo airspace, and it's meant to accommodate VFR traffic flying through the area. So that we're not just going in random spots. Since again, we are entering Class Bravo, you do have to receive that clearance. And to figure out if there's any VFR transition routes, it's all going to be back of your TAC again, that terminal area chart. So a good example of one nearby is the Skyline route going up the Hudson. So we also have something called a terminal radar service area, TRSA, which we also have nearby. So this is a little bit confusing. It's actually a remnant of the old national airspace system, but it's still here. You're still going to get approach radar services, but a good way to think about it is it's optional Class Charlie airspace. You do have radar services, but the participation is actually not mandatory, so you're not required to talk to air traffic control to be in it. So here's what the TRSA looks like on a sectional. So kind of similar, with the core and shelf rings, but it's kind of this like shaded gray line, and it'll say Wilkes-Barre TRSA, for example, for this one here. And again, the important thing to remember this is voluntary participation, right? So it's kind of optional Class Charlie airspace. The service is there if you want it. I'd always recommend talking. So there you go. Something else that we have is a parachute jump area. I know there's a lot of these other airspaces are almost done. So there's a parachute jump area. So here's one. Cross Keys, you see this little parachute symbol next to it. There's a parachute jump area. And these are actually published in chart supplements. So I didn't really know this until recently either, but you can find these in your chart supplements. So for example, in the table of contents, section 4, right here, parachute jumping areas in the New York or the chart supplement. So you can find all the information in there. So that's actually pretty useful. So we have a national security area. So this is where, again, there's a requirement for increased security or safety of ground facilities. And as pilots, we're requested to voluntarily avoid flying through these national security areas. However, they may have to temporarily prohibit flights, so they will send out a NOTAM in that event. And finally, the last one. So the U.S. wildlife refuges, parks, and forest service areas. So you can see these on your sectional chart by these solid blue lines. You're going to have dots in the middle. So some kind of wildlife refuge or whatever's going on in there. So as pilots, we are requested to maintain a minimum of 2,000 feet AGL above these areas. And that's pretty much it. So I just want to share some additional resources here for you guys. So of course, chapter 3 of the Aeronautical Information Manual is all about airspace. So you're going to find everything I talked about in here, plus additional information. So additionally, there's a couple other things here. So the FAA safety for wings credit, there's also an airspace course. So let me just pop that open here. Okay, here it is. So ALC-42 is the course, and it's airspace, special use airspace, and TFRs. So if you go through this, you will get your wings credit. We also have some AOPA resources that are pretty good too. So I think I shared an AOPA online course for the last Zoom session, which was on radio communications. They also have a really, really good one for airspace. So here it is. Know before you go, navigating today's airspace online course, and you will also get wings credit for this. So a lot of good modules in there that'll explain everything we talked about as well. And there's also these flashcards that they have. I mean, if you're into using flashcards to help memorize stuff, this is pretty good. So if you look up AOPA airspace flashcards, you'll see these as well. So you can kind of print these out, fold them in half, and you'll see the sectional image of what this is. And you have to kind of be able to figure out what it is. On the back is a description, requirements, limitations, some questions to ask. So this is also a really good resource to kind of everything on the National Airspace System. All right, so that's pretty much comes to the end of my portion here. So thank you everybody for listening. If you guys have questions about anything we talked about today, so now's the time we can kind of chat here.
Excuse me, Wes, do we want to have Nate go and then we'll do a Q&A, or do you want to do Q&A first?
So I was planning we'll probably do just airspace questions first to get that out of the way. And then after that, we'll do the passenger briefing. Is that all good with you, Nate?
Nate, I will do it that way as well, since it's 2 different topics.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Excellent.
Let's do that. All right. So yeah, we'll open it up for questions now about the National Airspace System.
So if you guys have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. You can also type it in the chat, and we'll get it asked and answered.
So Wes, this is Rich. Again, great job.
Thank you, Rich.
On the fuzzy magenta areas, can we go through that again around, like Class D or Class C airspace? Because sometimes it gets a little confusing. I know a lot of times it's for instrument approaches coming in and out of there, but can we go through one of those in maybe a little bit more detail?
Definitely, yes. That's definitely a confusing area for most people. I remember when I was on my private, this kind of stumped me a lot, but I'm going to open up that sectional chart again. We're going to figure this out. So here's our New York sectional. We can see a lot of those kind of fuzzy or soft shaded magenta lines. So let's go to Princeton again, which is over here. And if we take a look right over here, there's that magenta line. One side is soft and another side is hard. Does that make sense so far?
Yep.
Okay, so whenever you're on the soft side, so like in this area over here, like Princeton or in this town or whatever this is, Class E is going to begin at 700 feet AGL. If you're on the other side, so like the hard side, this kind of little triangle shape or whatever this section is, inside here, Class E begins at 1,200 feet AGL. So that's the difference there. Soft side begins at 700 AGL. If you're on the hard side, it begins at 1200. So like Princeton is on the soft side, so that would begin at 700 AGL. So does that kind of clear it up a little bit with the Class E?
Yeah, but also, does that also exist around? Again, maybe looking at. I don't think it's at Trenton, but other ones where it may extend out on an instrument approach. Some of those same things.
Okay, good question. So yeah, Trenton, this is just all Class D. But I'm gonna go down to McGuire. So like here's McGuire right here. So we know that this kind of core is Class D airspace, right? That's Class D. However, anytime you're going to see the dashed magenta, that's going to indicate Class E from the surface. So even though this is kind of an extension, Class E in this little zone is going to begin from surface up to the 18,000.
Okay.
So, yeah, we wouldn't consider the kind of the shade of magenta here. We just know Class E is from the surface all the way up to 18,000.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Of course. Does that clarify anything?
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. Yeah, good question, Rich, for sure. All right. Anybody else have any questions here? All right. So one of my students here, Brian, asked a question in the chat. What would you recommend besides the AOPA additional resources to study? So a couple different options, right? So FAA resources, Pilot's Handbook for Aeronautical Knowledge is going to discuss, again, National Airspace System in good detail. There's a whole chapter on that. So definitely read through the entire thing as you should be. Think if you have the Jeppesen textbooks too, same exact deal. Their Guided Flight Discovery Private Pilot textbook will also cover the National Airspace System. So as long as you're using any one of those, that's going to be the kind of core of the material there.
Hey, Wes.
Hey, what's up? I can't figure out who's talking right now. Let me see.
Sorry, it's Jack. My camera, my computer's kind of weird.
Okay.
Hello. If you're flying and you're on flight following on a VFR flight and your path is going to take you to a restricted area, will the people on flight following give you a heads up, or will they let you blindly blow through that?
That's a good question. You know, they should give you a heads up, but it's definitely also our responsibility to check to make sure that it's inactive. But what I would recommend in that situation, if you see you're on a flight following and you are approaching a restricted area, what I do, I always just ask to say, I always ask them if restricted area, 5001 alpha is hot or cold, and they'll tell me there. But that's probably what I would recommend. What about you, Nate? Do you think you have more insight on that?
Oh, yeah, I would agree. So there was one time I fly from Princeton along the shoreline all the way down to first flight, Kitty Hawk, right? So we would pass through a few airspaces over there. Long story short, ATC would normally warn you about the restricted area being hot. And the restricted area that I was talking about is the NASA launch facility over in Maryland. Delaware, I think it's Maryland, all the way down along the shore. Not all ATCs are perfect, so you as a good pilot would already know what zone you're going to be crossing, so you'll be right away always ask.
Right.
Right on. Cool. Thank you.
All right, so I got a message here from Mary. So do you think this would come up with the oral for the check right? Yes, 100%. So if you look at the private pilot ACS, one of the tasks is the National Airspace System. So you are expected to have a good understanding of pretty much all of this we've talked about. But yeah, the examiner could ask you to take out a sectional, point at different spots, kind of ask what kind of airspace this is, what do you need to enter here, operating requirements, all that kind of stuff. So definitely would be on a check ride. All right, cool. So if there's no other questions, we will transition into Nate's portion here. But if there are, just keep them coming through the chat and we can kind of talk about that later. But I think we can transition to Nate's portion here. You all ready, Nate?
All right.
All right, sweet. So let me stop sharing my screen then, and I will let you do your thing and I'll observe. All right, cool.
All right, Nate, I just made you a host, and you should be able to share your screen now if you have anything you'd like to share.
Okay, thanks, James. I'm still looking for that share button. Wesley, thank you for that dense and very knowledgeable session. So mine's a little shorter.
All right, yeah, I'm sure it's still good.
I'm going to roll through this, and towards the end, I'll take questions at the end. So a little bit about myself here. So CFI Nate Kijpatanasil. I'm a full-time civil engineer at the Port Authority. I work at Newark Liberty International. So long story short, get to see planes every day. I love it. I've been flying at Princeton ever since 2011. I started my training over at Lincoln Park. Found this place, fell in love with it, loved the area, loved the vibe, good people, good training area. Been here ever since. I love to do a lot of long cross-country flight. That picture right there, it's me flying with my buddy Larry. We went all the way up to from here on a diamond over to Niagara Falls. Went over there, circled the falls a couple of times, land at the local airport there, took the crew car, walk across the bridge, and then, take some pictures on the Canadian side. On the way back, just so you know, the US would charge you 50 cents cash only to cross the bridge back again. So keep it handy. I almost had to jump the fence to get back in. But then again, I questioned whether I really want to get back because the Canadian side was so nice. So that was that. Lastly here, I also have a couple other extra endorsements for fun. I got high performance, complex, tail wheel, one of my favorite. Looking to get the tail wheel over the airport, so that's in the works. Stay tuned. Okay, so today topics, second topic of the day will cover safety briefing. Like a good pilot, you will know your regulations. So looking over at Title 14 Code of Federal Regulation, 14 CFR Part 91.107. As a PIC, you are required to brief your passengers on how to operate your seatbelts. Okay, Part 91.519, that's really more pertains to turbine and multi-engine, more like a Part 135 operator. But it has a lot of good stuff in there if you guys can go take a look at there. Most of the stuff we'll cover in the safety briefing, but in an essence, it's, if you've ever been in an airline traveling, it says the PIC cannot allow the aircraft to move on the surface, basically taxiing, take off, or land unless all your occupants have been told to put their seatbelts on. Keyword is told. It's your job to enforce as well, but if they don't, then you could still sort of legally in a gray area move the aircraft. That doesn't cover the when you're in cruise. So when you're in cruise, they could take it off. So give that a quick read. Last bullet point there, why we do safety brief. Ultimately, we want everybody to have fun flying, but then it all comes down to survival as well in a weird circumstances where you have a normal flight conditions where you're not landing at the airport, when you have a forced landing somewhere else. So that will come in handy where you want people to be thinking ahead. It's similar to how we brief student or other pilots on, hey, on a takeoff roll, if you lose an engine while you're on a runway with sufficient runway left, what do you do? Once you're airborne with this amount of feet, what do you do? That sort of thing. Okay, first letters of the safety comes to seat belts. As easy, as natural as it is, you got to teach your occupants how to operate the seat belts. If you've flown the P models before, we don't have the gravity latch like we would normally have in the R or the S models, right? You have two different straps itself. Learn how to fasten them. Also, when you are supposed to be wearing seatbelts? So as a PIC, you tell them, all right, before we move the aircraft, take off, landing. In cruise, okay, maybe you could take it off, but I really don't recommend it. All that spiel, because we could hit turbulence. It could be unforeseen wake turbulence or wind shear or whatnot, and you might be hitting the ceiling a little bit if you don't wear it. Most of them, I've never had anybody taken off before, so not that I know of, even if they pass out in the back seat. Air vents. Okay, this is where environmental control comes in handy. Okay, you tell them, all right, these are your air vents in case you get hot or too cold. Tell them how to operate it, lefty loosey, righty tighty. In the winter, you also have a heat as well. You let them know if they like it, all right, nice and warm, or you want it extra crispy. So show them how to turn it on and off. F stands for fire extinguisher. Do you even have one in your aircraft? Are you required to have one in your aircraft? So check it. Is it functioning? Is the needle is it charged? Is it fully inspected? Tell them how to operate it, right? So most in our aircraft here at Princeton Airport, the fire extinguishers are in between the front seats. It has two latches, so you have to unlatch them both, pull it forward. I normally would always designate a fire marshal because being the more experienced pilot in emergency, I will take over as a PIC, division of labor. So I make the front guy become a fire marshal, so to speak. So his job, if we ever have a forced landing, or her job is to pull that out. and run out the aircraft with it. And also teaching them the ABC of operation as well. You know, aim low, fire at the base, sweeping motion to put out the fire. And that transitions us into emergency, the exit. You know, how to operate the door itself. How many doors do we have in this aircraft? So in Cessna, we have one. In the Diamond, you got one with the latch on the front side, on the pilot side, on the left side, and the back has its own ways to operate the door. That, if you've seen the back door of the Diamond, that doesn't really come naturally to most people. You have to lift the little handle and awkwardly try to press a little button that's hidden underneath and try to open it. In emergency, you know, in a fight or flight reaction, people are just gonna, it ain't opening. And then somebody's gonna end up kicking Jeff's window out. So teach them how to operate them, show them. Emergency equipments. What do you have in the aircraft? Let's say you're on a forced landing. So every time I fly, say I go to Martha's Vineyard, I'm gonna be crossing a lot of waters. Usually, I'm not a good swimmer. You know, I would have a flotation device for each occupant in an aircraft. Maybe you're traveling on a night flight. Okay, have your flashlight, maybe a flare, maybe an ELT or a portable radio. Tell them, hey, these are stuff that you have. It might be in a baggage compartment. It might be a ration, an MRE, meals ready to eat. Also nice things to have in a long cross country. Maybe extra oil, extra can of fuel maybe. So that'll be up to you as a PIC to plan all that. This drawing right here, I borrowed from the Civil Air Patrol. It doesn't have to be this plan, but their plan is, okay, if the airplane is occupied with 4 people, you know, the seats would already be up, right? To expedite the egress, the front 2 passenger will exit to the right, whereas the rear passenger will take the left exit. That allows everybody to get out of Dodge really fast. And you brief them, hey, look, if we got emergency, meet in the back of the aircraft, for example, let's stay about 50 feet away from the aircraft because maybe the prop is still hot, maybe something's burning and cooking. We want to get away safe. And then if we want to fight fire, it looks like it's safe enough to do it, then call for help. Traffic. Yeah, you know, on a Saturday, Princeton Airport could look really like Newark International or LaGuardia. It could be very well like a number 5 for takeoff and waiting to go around. Have your passengers help locate the traffic around you, and you brief them by, you know, by ways of clock. You tell them, okay, if you're facing 12 o'clock and you see a plane to your right, you know, toward your northeast, 2 o'clock high, 9 o'clock low, that sort of thing. If they think it's going to impact you, there will be an extra sets of eyes and ears. The other T stands for for talking. I would enforce a sterile cockpit. You brief them on what it is, right? What is sterile cockpit? You know, during high time of when you're really busy as a pilot, during taxiing, takeoff, landing, tell them if it's not pertain to safety or it's some random conversation about New Jersey Shore or Sopranos, that could wait till we're in a long cruise. Otherwise, if you see like a loose dog starts running toward us, tell us right away, then we could safely stop. And then lastly, the Y stands for, do you have any questions? You know, if no matter what, they will always have some sort of questions at the end. You could always brief them things like, in addition to this, maybe the routes, the time expected en routes, the sceneries that you're going to be crossing. Can I take pictures? Can I leave the phone on regular cellular roaming mode? Well, that sort of questions. Which leave us off with, do you guys have any questions for me? Or Wes? Rich, you've been taking a lot of notes. Got any questions, sir?
Nate, good job on going through that. I like your safety acronym. It makes it easy to follow. I find that most of my passengers, you know, much more interested in the safety briefing, you know, on a general aviation aircraft than they are in the airline, where they tend to just, continue reading a book or everything else. And, again, them asking the questions at the end, or again, getting involved with the see something, say something type of mentality. So I find this is good.
Thanks for that. That's good feedback. And when I brief passengers, I take them through the front of the cockpit as well. You could throw things like airspeed indicator and what each things on the panel does, the main stuff, the 6-pack. Definitely show them maybe the ELT, how to operate it in case we become incapacitated. Maybe show them 121.5, how to tune it in, how to activate, how to push the talk, call for help. Tell them, hey, here's a tail number. In case of emergency, maybe we want to cover who we are, where we are, souls on board, what type of emergency, and that sort of stuff. Okay, nobody else got any question? I hand this back to James.
Excellent. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Wesley. Both of you guys did an amazing job. And I mean, if we all could clap, I'm sure we would be clapping right now.
Thanks, guys. You guys have been a wonderful audience.
I'm sure we're going to have another meeting come next month. And looks like Wes is nodding. Perhaps we'll get Nate in on it as well. Wes, you want to give us a sneak peek?
Hold on. Let me pull up my schedule. I have we've got one planned for every month throughout the rest of the year, actually. So let me let's see what's next here. We probably change things around, but let me pull up Word. Okay, so I have for the next one, it's tentative operations of systems. So we'll talk about flight controls, pitot-static, vacuum instruments, electrical systems, stuff like that. So that's what we have as of now.
Excellent. So, and if you guys have ideas, I mean, sounds like we've got a plan, but we can always try to incorporate other ideas into these presentations. And we want to help you guys as much as possible with any sort of flight training or any sort of experience. Following that, I think that's all we have for tonight. If you guys want to sign off, thank you all for joining us. And thanks again, Wesley, and thank you, Nate.
Yep.
All right, you got it.
Yo, at the airport, come on by.
Yeah, come on by, guys. Have a good night.
Good
All
night.
right, take care, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good job, guys.
Thank you.